Welcome back to Avoidanza. Today I want to share something that comes directly from my experience working in therapy. I spend most of my time helping people with avoidant attachment, and over the years I've had the chance to see not only what they struggle with when they first begin therapy, but also how their lives unfold as we continue working together. Watching that process has taught me a lot. Every avoidant person has a different story, but there are also patterns that appear again and again. As therapy progresses, I get to see how their romantic relationships evolve, how family dynamics affect them, the challenges they face at work, and many other personal struggles. Of course, there are private clinical details that I would never discuss publicly, but one thing I can say is that relationships are almost always a major source of stress for them. It becomes one of the biggest themes throughout therapy because close connections are often where their deepest fears and protective behaviors show up. Something else I don't mention very often is that I also specialize in working with anger and personality-related issues. Because of that, many of the people I see come to therapy struggling with intense anger as well as avoidant attachment. I can't say this applies to every avoidant person, but I have noticed that a large number of clients dealing with anger also have either fearful or dismissive avoidant attachment patterns. Personally, I don't think that's a coincidence. Many avoidant individuals grow up feeling like their emotions aren't safe to express. They learn to hide sadness, fear, disappointment, and vulnerability. Those emotions don't disappear. They simply get pushed down until they eventually come out in another form. Quite often, that form is anger. I tend to see this especially with avoidant men, although it certainly isn't limited to them. I thought that was an interesting observation worth sharing before we get into today's topic. Today I want to talk about how you can recognize when an avoidant person has formed a genuine emotional bond with someone. Or maybe a better way to say it is how to recognize the person they've truly become attached to. This matters because when an avoidant forms a deep emotional connection, that relationship usually carries a lot of weight. They don't emotionally invest in people easily. They're extremely selective about who they allow into that space. And once that bond is established, they're often far more committed than people realize. One of the strongest signs is when they feel safe with someone who can respectfully agree to disagree. This might sound simple, but it has a powerful effect on an avoidant person. Being able to have different opinions without constant arguments or pressure to change helps them feel accepted. It tells them that the relationship values peace more than winning every disagreement. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, this creates a sense of emotional safety. Many avoidants expect conflict to become overwhelming or to end with someone trying to control them. When they realize they can express themselves honestly without being judged or forced to change their mind, they begin relaxing their defenses. They see that the other person isn't trying to erase their identity or prove them wrong at every turn. Interestingly, once avoidants feel accepted as they are, they often become much more willing to compromise. One of the biggest reasons they resist change is because they assume acceptance depends on becoming someone else. But when they experience genuine acceptance first, they no longer feel like they're defending themselves. That makes flexibility feel much less threatening. So, being able to respectfully disagree without damaging the relationship becomes one of the strongest foundations for emotional bonding. Another major factor is simply the passage of time. Long-term consistency means a great deal to many avoidant individuals. It may sound obvious, but it's true. One of the people they are most likely to emotionally bond with is the person who has remained a stable presence in their life. Now, this doesn't mean you should tolerate unhealthy behavior or stay in a relationship where you're treated poorly. That's not the message. Healthy boundaries are still important. What I'm saying is that avoidants often develop trust slowly. They appreciate relationships that are steady instead of constantly breaking apart and starting over. A partner who has been consistently supportive, emotionally stable, and reliable gradually becomes associated with comfort and security. This is something I notice especially in fearful avoidance, although it can apply to dismissive avoidance as well. Once they finally decide that someone truly matters to them, they tend to hold on to that connection for a very long time. It often takes them much longer than other people to reach that point, but when they do, that emotional bond usually becomes incredibly meaningful and surprisingly difficult for them to let go of. Avoidant people are often like someone making a major purchase. They may spend weeks or even months comparing options before choosing a house or a car. They think everything through, weigh every possibility, and don't rush into decisions. But once they finally make that choice, they usually stick with it. They become incredibly loyal to what they've chosen because they invested so much time making sure it was right. The same pattern often shows up in their relationships. They don't attach quickly, but once they genuinely decide someone is safe and important, they become deeply invested. The person who has consistently been there through time, without creating constant instability, often becomes the one they feel the strongest connection with. They don't easily let go of relationships that have become part of their emotional foundation. If you've shared a healthy, long-term relationship with an avoidant, chances are they're not secretly looking for a way out. That doesn't mean relationships never end, but in many cases they're much more committed than they appear on the surface. If someone walks away, it's often not the avoidant making that decision first. Another quality that creates an incredibly strong emotional bond is self-awareness. Avoidant individuals are deeply drawn to people who can honestly recognize their own behavior, instead of placing all the responsibility on someone else. This doesn't only apply to attachment triggers, it applies to personal growth in general. Imagine you realize you've been sending repeated messages while your partner is busy working. Instead of defending yourself, you acknowledge that this habit probably creates pressure for them and that it's something you genuinely want to improve. You're not asking them to carry the entire relationship or expecting them to make every adjustment. You're taking responsibility for your own part. That kind of maturity stands out to an avoidant person. In fact, many find it incredibly attractive because it shows emotional responsibility rather than blame. They often feel much safer with someone who is willing to reflect on themselves instead of constantly pointing fingers. This quality creates trust, and trust is one of the biggest building blocks of emotional attachment for an avoidant. Out of all the traits they appreciate, this is one of the strongest. Closely connected to self-awareness is the ability to apologize sincerely. Healthy relationships involve accountability from both people, and avoidants often respond very positively when they experience genuine apologies. That doesn't mean you should always apologize first or accept blame that isn't yours. The point is that both partners should be willing to admit mistakes when they're wrong. For example, you might say, "I realize I was texting you too much while you were working. I was feeling anxious, but I understand that it added pressure. I'm sorry, and I'm trying to handle those feelings differently." An apology like that communicates something much bigger than the words themselves. When an avoidant hears this, they often begin feeling safer admitting their own mistakes too. Instead of seeing the relationship as a place where they'll constantly be criticized, they begin seeing it as a partnership where both people's feelings matter. That's a huge shift for someone who has spent much of their life expecting emotional needs to be ignored or misunderstood. Many avoidant individuals hold back emotionally, not because they don't care, but because they doubt their needs will ever receive the same attention they give to others. A sincere apology tells them that their experience matters too. It reassures them that the relationship isn't only focused on one person's emotions, but is built on mutual understanding and respect. This kind of interaction strengthens commitment. It lowers their fear of emotional closeness because they begin believing the relationship can actually be safe. It also encourages them to become more accountable themselves. As both people practice taking responsibility, emotional intimacy grows naturally instead of feeling forced. Avoidants often admire partners who model this kind of emotional maturity, and over time they become more willing to mirror it. Another behavior that helps an avoidant feel emotionally connected is remaining calm when things don't unfold exactly as expected. This doesn't mean ignoring your own needs or pretending everything is fine. It simply means responding thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. Take the example of an anxious partner who feels happiest seeing their significant other every other day. Their desire for frequent connection is completely understandable. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner may only feel comfortable meeting once a week because that's all they can emotionally handle at the moment. Neither person is necessarily wrong. They simply have different emotional needs. Now imagine they've argued about this issue repeatedly. Eventually, the avoidant reaches their limit and firmly says, "I just can't do every other day. I'm not ready for that." Even if the conversation becomes emotional, what matters most is how the other partner responds afterward. A calm, respectful response instead of an explosive reaction often makes the avoidant feel significantly safer. Rather than feeling trapped or overwhelmed, they experience someone who can tolerate disappointment without turning the relationship into another emotional battle. That sense of emotional safety becomes another powerful reason they continue strengthening the bond instead of pulling away. I need a little more space right now. My schedule is packed, work takes a lot out of me, and I have other responsibilities outside of that too. In this situation, the avoidant isn't saying they don't care about their partner. What they're really saying is, I do care about you, but I honestly can't promise more than I'm capable of giving right now. I know this isn't what you want, and I understand that. It's something I think about, but at this moment this is all I can realistically offer. If that's not enough for you, I understand if you decide to walk away. That way of thinking is actually very common for avoidant individuals. Now imagine the other person reacts with anger. They accuse them of not caring, tell them they're emotionally broken, insist they need therapy, or criticize them for being cold and detached. They explain how rejected and unloved they feel, but they do it through blame and emotional escalation. When an avoidant experiences that kind of reaction, they usually don't move closer. Instead, they pull back even further because they no longer feel emotionally safe. The conversation becomes something they want to escape rather than resolve. Now picture the same situation with a different response. The partner says, I'm disappointed because this isn't what I was hoping for, but I appreciate you being honest with me. I still want this relationship, and I still want us to make it work. Hearing your explanation helps me understand why you can't spend more time together right now. I can accept once a week for now, and maybe when things calm down or our relationship grows stronger, we can revisit the conversation. That kind of response immediately changes the emotional atmosphere. Instead of feeling trapped or pressured, the avoidant feels understood. Their defenses begin to lower because they no longer believe they're being attacked or forced into something they're not ready for. Feeling accepted often inspires them to give more over time because the relationship starts to feel like a safe place rather than another source of pressure. They may even become motivated to work toward meeting their partner's needs because they genuinely felt respected in that difficult conversation. Another quality avoidants value deeply is a relationship that prioritizes peace instead of constant emotional chaos. Most people probably appreciate this, but for avoidants, it carries even more weight. They naturally feel drawn toward partners who can discuss problems calmly instead of turning every disagreement into a major conflict. That doesn't mean difficult conversations should be avoided forever, nor does it mean you should suppress your feelings or constantly walk on eggshells. Healthy relationships still require honesty. The difference is knowing when a discussion has reached the point where neither person is thinking clearly anymore. Sometimes the healthiest decision is simply saying, we've both shared our thoughts, and I think we're getting overwhelmed. Let's pause for now instead of continuing to argue. Overall, our relationship is good, and this issue doesn't have to be solved tonight. Why don't we spend some time together, enjoy the rest of the evening, and come back to this when we're both calmer? Responses like that are incredibly comforting for many avoidants. They see someone who values the relationship more than winning an argument. They know the disagreement hasn't been ignored forever, but they also see that their partner isn't trying to force a resolution in the middle of emotional overload. That balance creates emotional security, and emotional security is one of the strongest ingredients for lasting attachment. The final quality is something many avoidants don't even realize they desperately need until they finally experience it. It's having a partner who allows room for ordinary human mistakes. Most people appreciate a little grace, but avoidants often crave it on a much deeper level. They don't want every small error turned into a major character flaw. When they know they can make a mistake, admit it, and repair it without being harshly judged, they begin relaxing in the relationship. It starts feeling safe instead of stressful. I was reminded of this during one of my recent therapy sessions. It's something that shows up not only with avoidant attachment, but in many healthy long-term relationships as well. Imagine a married couple. One partner says, "Go out with your friends and enjoy yourself. I have no problem with that. I'd just appreciate it if you came home around 1 in the morning because we have responsibilities tomorrow, and I'd like to know you're safe." It's not controlling. It's simply an agreement based on mutual respect. Maybe they have children, maybe they both work early, or maybe they just have plans the next day. Now imagine the avoidant loses track of time and doesn't get home until 2. Nothing dramatic happened, they simply stayed out longer than they intended. The next morning, instead of hiding it or becoming defensive, they admit it honestly. They say, "I ended up staying later than we agreed. I got caught up spending time with everyone, and before I realized it, it was already late. I'm sorry about that. I know we talked about coming home earlier." Moments like these often reveal whether the relationship feels emotionally safe. When the response is understanding instead of overly critical, avoidants learn that mistakes don't automatically lead to rejection. They realize problems can be acknowledged, repaired, and left behind instead of becoming evidence that they're failing the relationship. That simple experience of grace often strengthens trust far more than people realize. Let's continue with one final example, because I think it really brings this idea together. Imagine an avoidant partner comes home and says, "I know we agreed I'd be home around 1, but I lost track of time and didn't get back until 2. I'm sorry. I still feel okay, but I know I came in later than we planned." This isn't a huge betrayal. It isn't necessarily an attachment problem. It's simply a small mistake that happens in everyday relationships. But what often determines the health of the relationship isn't the mistake itself, it's how the other partner responds. One response might be immediate anger and suspicion. They start asking, "Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you answer your phone? What are you hiding?" Suddenly, a minor issue turns into a major confrontation. Instead of focusing on solving the problem, the conversation becomes filled with accusations, defensiveness, and emotional tension. Now imagine a different response. The partner says, "Thank you for telling me. I appreciate your honesty. There was a reason I asked you to be home earlier. We have an early flight tomorrow. We promised we'd leave together, or we have responsibilities that can't be delayed. When you came home late, it affected those plans. I understand mistakes happen, but I'd really appreciate it if next time you kept our agreement in mind." Notice what's different here. The partner doesn't ignore what happened. They aren't pretending it doesn't matter, and they aren't dismissing their own feelings. They're simply expressing disappointment without turning the situation into a personal attack. That balance is incredibly meaningful for an avoidant person. In this example, the avoidant made a mistake. Maybe they got caught up talking with friends. Maybe they lost track of time. Maybe they simply prioritized the moment without thinking about the consequences. Whatever the reason, they didn't keep the commitment they had made. That's something worth discussing. Accountability is still important, but accountability doesn't require humiliation. The partner can absolutely feel frustrated. They can explain why the agreement mattered and how the delay affected the day's plans. They can reinforce the importance of honoring commitments. What they don't have to do is make the avoidant feel like one mistake defines their entire character or means the relationship is falling apart. This is where emotional tolerance becomes so valuable. Tolerance doesn't mean accepting unhealthy behavior forever. It doesn't mean becoming passive or allowing someone to repeatedly ignore your needs. Instead, it means recognizing the difference between a recurring pattern and an ordinary human mistake. Every healthy relationship includes moments where someone forgets something, arrives late, misunderstands a conversation, or makes a poor decision. Those moments don't always require harsh criticism. Sometimes they simply require honesty, understanding, and a conversation about doing better next time. For avoidant individuals, this kind of response creates enormous emotional safety. Many avoidants already carry an internal fear of being judged, criticized, or seen as inadequate. Because of those fears, they often expect even small mistakes to result in rejection or conflict. When that expectation doesn't happen, when their partner responds calmly while still maintaining healthy boundaries, it completely changes how they experience the relationship. They begin realizing they don't have to be perfect to be loved. They learn that mistakes can be repaired instead of becoming permanent evidence that they're failing. That realization makes emotional closeness feel much less threatening. One of the most attractive qualities an avoidant sees in a partner is someone who can remain true to themselves while still showing compassion. You don't have to hide your disappointment. You don't have to pretend everything is fine if it isn't. You're allowed to express your feelings, explain your perspective, and communicate your expectations. The difference is doing it without trying to punish the other person. That's what emotional maturity looks like. It's saying, I understand what happened. I appreciate your honesty. This affected me, and I'd like us to do better next time. That approach protects both people. It allows accountability without creating unnecessary emotional damage. When avoidants experience that kind of relationship consistently, they often become much more willing to admit mistakes in the future. Instead of hiding problems because they fear criticism, they become more open and transparent because they've learned honesty will be met with understanding rather than immediate judgment. Over time, this builds trust. It strengthens emotional security. It makes both partners feel like they're on the same team instead of constantly fighting against each other. So when we talk about tolerating small mistakes, we're not talking about lowering your standards or ignoring important issues. We're talking about responding with proportion. Small mistakes deserve thoughtful conversations, not emotional explosions. Healthy correction is very different from harsh punishment. When an avoidant feels that balance, where they can be accountable without being shamed, they often develop a much deeper emotional attachment to the relationship. They begin viewing their partner as someone who is emotionally safe, emotionally steady, and genuinely supportive. Looking back at everything we've discussed, several qualities consistently help avoidants build deep emotional bonds. They connect strongly with partners who can respectfully agree to disagree instead of trying to force complete agreement. They value people who remain consistent over time because trust grows slowly for them. They're deeply attracted to self-awareness and personal responsibility because it shows emotional maturity. They appreciate sincere apologies because they create mutual accountability instead of blame. They feel safer with partners who stay calm during disagreements instead of reacting impulsively. They thrive in relationships that value peace over constant conflict. And finally, they bond most deeply with people who allow room for ordinary human mistakes while still maintaining healthy boundaries. None of these qualities require you to abandon your own needs or silence your feelings. Instead, they create a relationship where both people feel respected, heard, and emotionally secure. That's the kind of environment where avoidants are most likely to lower their defenses, trust more deeply, and invest wholeheartedly in the relationship. If you're hoping to build a stronger connection with an avoidant partner, strengthen your relationship, or rebuild a marriage that's struggling, these qualities can make an incredible difference. They encourage emotional safety, deepen trust, and create the conditions where genuine commitment can continue growing over time. I hope you found these insights helpful. If you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, be sure to support Avoidantsa by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.